Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show built to take the most challenging, dense intellectual sources and refine them into concentrated, potent knowledge tailored just for you. Today we are wrestling with one of the most fundamental questions of all political philosophy, distributive justice. In simple terms, how should a society distribute its goods, its wealth, and its opportunities to be, truly just?
It really is the question that fuels countless political arguments every single day. And historically, the answers philosophers have offered tend to fall into three main categories.
Okay.
You have egalitarianism, which says fairness and equality of outcome or opportunity matter most.
The classic view.
Right. Then you have prioritarianism, which argues that we should prioritize helping the worst off, but often in a measured, sort of weighted utility way. And then you have the concept that is our focus today, one that has often been treated as, well, a simple footnote, Sufficientarianism.
At first glance, Sufficientarianism seems beautifully straightforward. Justice is achieved if and only if everyone has enough. It appeals to a fundamental moral intuition, right? That no one should suffer deprivation.
Absolutely. But as we are about to discover, defining and then defending that concept of enough is an absolute intellectual battlefield.
And that's where our source material comes in. We're looking at Professor Lasse Nielsen's new work, A New Theory of Sufficientarian Justice, which develops this really complex framework called the umbel view.
And this umbel view is a direct response to decades of critique aimed at, let's call it, traditional single-threshold sufficientarianism. Critics argued that a single floor, a single line below which no one should fall, was just philosophically too simple to account for the actual complexity of human life and social injustice.
So Nielsen's work is an attempt to build something more robust.
Exactly. It's a comprehensive, multiple-threshold theory developed specifically to refute those critiques and really to make sufficientarianism a viable, demanding political ideal.
I love the umbel view. It's a botanical metaphor, isn't it? It suggests that justice isn't a single, flat, concrete floor we're all supposed to stand on.
It's a great analogy.
It's more like a plant structure, an umbel inflorescence, which is a cluster of stalks branching out from a common point. So that suggests this standard of justice isn't one level of enough, but a complex branching structure covering, 8 separate and critical spheres of human life.
That analogy is absolutely key, and we'll unpack it fully later. Our mission for you in this deep dive is to fundamentally shift your understanding of sufficiency.
Right.
We need to move past the idea that sufficientarianism is only concerned with, not starving. We're going to show you that the umbel view posits it as a highly demanding, multidimensional political ideal that, if you take it seriously, requires far more radical intervention than traditional egalitarian theories often mandate.
So we'll explore its foundation, see how it answers its critics.
And examine its radical implications for real-world policy on everything from universal basic income to how we deal with the existence of extreme wealth.
Okay, let's unpack this core concept first. We start with the fundamental sufficientarian intuition, which is that justice is focused on reaching an absolute level of well-being. It's not about comparison to others.
Right. It's an explicit rejection of what we might call the intrinsic value of distributive equality. The distinctiveness of sufficientarianism is tied directly to this rejection. If you start adding concerns about equality above the sufficiency threshold, saying, yes, everyone has enough, but the massive gap between the rich is also unjust.
Then you're sort of mixing your theories.
You are. You're practicing what philosophers call pattern pluralism.
And wait, help me understand that. Why is pattern pluralism a problem for sufficientarianism?
Because if you mix sufficiency with egalitarian principles above the threshold, sufficientarianism just loses its unique identity. It becomes just another hybrid egalitarian view.
I see.
The sources argue forcefully that if sufficientarianism is to stand as a distinct and primary theory of justice, it has to assert that reaching the point where everyone has enough alone exhausts our obligations of distributive justice.
So once the floor is hit across all these different dimensions, justice, as a matter of distribution, is done. Period.
That's the claim.
That's a high philosophical hurdle to clear, because it means the theory has to be robust enough to handle all the problems that are usually reserved for theories that prioritize fairness or equality. So where does this robust theory ground itself?
It grounds itself not in comparing resources or happiness, but in the qualitative assessment of deficiency.
This is the moral center of the umbel view. The theory argues that sufficientarianism is the only perspective that gives a central place to the moral importance of eliminating deficiency.
Yes.
The core idea is simple. Getting rid of someone's pain or suffering is a moral good in itself, regardless of their ranking compared to everyone else.
And to understand this moral gravity, we need to draw a really sharp line between needs and desires. Needs track Aristotle's idea of necessity, things without which it is impossible to live a decent life, or for the good life to even exist. Needs are objective, they're universal, and they're morally demanding. When you lack a fundamental necessity, be it food, shelter, or basic respect, you are experiencing a tangible lack, a deficiency that is morally compelling in a way a desire just isn't.
This brings us back to that classic critique of egalitarianism, the leveling down objection.
Right.
Egalitarians often argue that injustice is rooted in the difference, the comparative relationship between, say, a rich person, Alice, and a poor person, Bob.
And if the injustice truly rested only in that comparison, you could rectify it by simply making Alice and Bob equally destitute.
You level Alice down to Bob's deficient level.
And from the perspective of pure equality, you have removed the inequality. Problem solved.
That feels morally abhorrent. Why would anyone think that's a solution?
Exactly. And the Sufficientarian uses this horror to argue that the true injustice wasn't the inequality between Alice and Bob. It was the absolute suffering inherent in Bob's deficiency.
So the solution that eliminates the injustice must be one that eliminates the deficiency itself, not just the comparison.
That's it. This non-comparative suffering is what has the real moral gravity.
So if an egalitarian tries to avoid this by saying, well, obviously we also care about maximizing welfare, so we choose to level up, not down, what's the Sufficientarian response?
The response is that they're importing other moral theories into their justification. They can't defend the choice to level up purely on the grounds of equality. They're borrowing from utilitarianism or from Sufficientarianism.
That makes sense.
And this leads us to the deficiency-sufficiency asymmetry. This is the key insight here. Deficiency like suffering, hunger, or oppression is qualitatively different and morally much, much weightier than the mere absence of an extra benefit.
Like the lack of surplus money or high happiness.
Precisely. The moral math just changes below the line of sufficiency. Our moral duties there become absolute and overriding.
Okay, so the umbel view takes this negative thesis, the idea that inequalities above the threshold are irrelevant to justice, very seriously.
It has to.
To test this intuition, the sources rely on some pretty famous thought experiments. Let's start with Roger Crisp's Beverly Hills case.
Okay, so imagine you have 10 extremely wealthy people. There are 10 rich people and 10,000 super rich people. Everyone is already living a fantastic life.
No one is suffering.
Not at all. And you have a finite amount of super luxury wine to distribute. Option A gives a slightly better vintage to the 10 rich people, who are the comparatively worst off in this, absurd context. This would reduce the wealth gap slightly.
Okay.
Option B gives a different but equally valuable wine to the 10,000 super rich, which would increase the gap. Both choices make the recipients, say, 2 units better off.
Now, if we were strict egalitarians or prioritarians, we would have a strong moral reason to choose option A.
You'd have to. It benefits the comparative worst off, the 10 rich.
But the Sufficientarian argues that this inequality among the very well-off just doesn't disturb our sense of justice at all.
And why is that? Because everyone involved, the rich and the super rich, is already so far above any morally relevant sufficiency threshold.
The gap isn't rooted in a deficiency.
No, it's merely a game of surplus. Our obligation of justice has already been exhausted. We are morally indifferent to whether the rich get the Lafite or the super rich get the Latour because everyone already has more than enough.
That wine case feels a little artificial, focusing on luxury. But the principle is clear. People above the line are just playing with surplus.
It is a bit artificial.
Let's try to apply that principle to something more serious, like Nielsen's elaboration on the slums or Hill's case.
This thought experiment is crucial because it pits the value of reducing suffering against the mathematical value of reducing inequality. So we have the planet Dagobah. An impartial committee must choose between 2 policies that reduce inequality by some numerical amount. Let's call it delta.
Okay.
Option A benefits the worst off in the slums, lifting them out of real poverty and deprivation. Option B benefits the worst off in the rich hills, lifting them to, say, moderate luxury.
A pure egalitarian would have to compare the delta of A and the delta of B. So if the benefit to the hills resulted in a numerically greater reduction of inequality across the entire society,
A strict egalitarian might have to prioritize the hills, or at least treat the choices as morally equal if the reduction amounts are identical.
but the Sufficientarian response is immediate, robust, and intuitive.
You must choose Option A.
Of course.
The choice is easy because of the overriding moral weight of the deficiency being experienced by the people in the slums. This proves that our deep moral commitment is to relieving absolute suffering, not to the mathematical reduction of relative difference.
The sheer magnitude of the suffering in the slums is the primary driver of justice.
Right. It renders the inequality reduction in the hills completely irrelevant.
This is a really complex area. Any political theory has to deal with the moral accounting of choice and consequence.
It's unavoidable.
What if someone is deficient, say, suffering from poor health or poverty, due to their own profoundly irresponsible choices? This is the root of the harshness objection that gets raised against theories like luck egalitarianism.
Yes. Luck egalitarianism tries to neutralize factors that are beyond our individual control, things like bad brute luck. But it insists that individuals have to bear the cost of their own reckless choices. Bad option luck.
So if you gambled away all your money or you deliberately neglected your health,
A strict luck egalitarian might actually deny you assistance to rectify your deficiency. And that, critics argue, is unacceptably harsh. It's uncompassionate. It's hard to imagine designing a policy that knowingly lets someone suffer simply because they made a mistake.
so how does the umbel view handle this dilemma? Does sufficiency just mean we ignore responsibility entirely?
Not at all, but it insists that the question of responsibility is secondary to the moral urgency of deficiency. The widely shared Sufficientarian position avoids the harshness objection entirely. By arguing that justice mandates securing basic needs and capabilities regardless of how the deficiency arose, the moral claim to have your basic needs met is non-negotiable.
So if someone is starving because they frivolously spent all their money, we still have a primary obligation of justice to feed them.
Precisely. The moral gravity of a life-threatening deficiency, be it hunger, exposure, or acute illness, is so overwhelming that its rectification takes absolute, what philosophers call lexical, priority over assigning fault or calculating responsibility.
So it naturally incorporates compassion into its foundational structure.
It does, and this doesn't mean we abandon concerns for responsibility entirely. We can still incorporate responsibility elsewhere, maybe through tax structures or education or rehabilitation systems, but never at the expense of meeting fundamental human needs. The floor must be upheld, no matter what.
So the umbel view establishes sufficiency as a powerful moral imperative. It's grounded in this idea of deficiency and autonomy. But traditional sufficientarianism still faced major hurdles that forced this evolution.
It did. There were some very serious objections.
Let's look at the objections that led to this multiple threshold model.
The first major challenge was conceptual. Critics, most notably Shlomi Segal, asked, what impersonal moral value actually grounds sufficiency?
Okay, what does he mean by that?
Well, egalitarianism is grounded in fairness. Prioritarianism is grounded in weighted utility. What grounds sufficiency? This is the groundlessness objection.
Right. If the only answer is, well, it just feels right to help the needy, that's not a solid enough foundation for an entire theory of political justice.
Correct. So the umbel view offers a two-part defense. First, it argues that the value of minimizing deficiency is an impersonal moral value, and it's arguably as solid as fairness.
But what's the second part?
The second answer is more powerful, grounding sufficiency in the objective personal value of autonomy or individual freedom.
The idea being that deficiency doesn't just make you unhappy, it literally removes your agency.
Exactly. The critical harm of being below the threshold of being impoverished or oppressed or suffering structurally is that it deprives you of the effective freedom to be the author of your own life. You lose the objective capability to choose valuable functionings.
And this deprivation of autonomy is an objective personal harm that justice has to prioritize.
Right. And the source material illustrates this beautifully by adjusting Segal's caviar case. It moves the discussion away from subjective happiness, from utility units, toward objective value.
How does that work?
So let's imagine we have Jones, who is currently insufficiently autonomous because he's constrained by some kind of physical or structural obstacle. Say he can't leave his deprived neighborhood to seek work or education.
Okay.
Removing this obstacle provides him with a significant objective personal value, which is freedom of movement. Now, we also have Smith, who is fully autonomous and flourishing. We could give Smith enough luxury caviar every day to yield the exact same subjective utility benefit that Jones gets from his newfound freedom.
So from a purely subjective view, you equals you. Both are equally happy with the outcome.
Yes, but the autonomy-catering Sufficientarian insists that the elimination of Jones's structural restriction makes his life objectively better in a profound way that is just incomparable to the luxury good for Smith.
Because justice cares about securing fundamental freedoms, not just pleasure.
That's it. Giving Smith caviar is morally insignificant in the context of distributive justice, while restoring Jones's freedom is significant. The theory is thus grounded in the objective value of functional freedom.
Okay, but that brings us to the next objection, which is the really practical thorn. If we give absolute priority to those below the threshold, aren't we committing ourselves to sacrificing massive aggregate benefits, huge amounts of utility or happiness for the many who are above the line, just to achieve a tiny benefit for the few below?
This is Arneson's arithmetic objection. Arneson famously implied that a sufficient number of small benefits, say bites of chocolate, could morally outweigh a single tragedy like a premature death. This arithmetic thinking is exactly what the Sufficientarian denies.
And they respond with what's called the numbers fallacy.
Exactly. This objection is based on abstract numbers without any qualitative substance.
So if we define the threshold qualitatively, not as a number, but as basic needs, food, water, shelter, the arithmetic argument just collapses.
Think about it. What does it really mean to sacrifice happiness for subsistence? It is not counterintuitive to prioritize meeting subsistence requirements for 10% of the population over giving further incremental non-essential benefits to the 90% who are already well-fed, housed, and secure.
Of course not.
Once we give the threshold meaningful qualitative content, defining it as the line of life-sustaining needs or autonomy-securing capabilities, the moral gravity of deficiency far outweighs the incremental, optional happiness of the affluent. The moral value is discontinuous. There is an absolute, non-negotiable demand at the deficiency line.
This objection is perhaps the most crucial driver behind the umbel view itself. Traditional Sufficientarianism, relying on just a single threshold, was philosophically unstable.
It really was.
Because the positive thesis, the urgency below the line, and the negative thesis, the indifference above the line, they contradicted each other depending on where you drew that single line.
Right. If you set the single threshold low, say, meeting mere physical subsistence, it works perfectly for the positive thesis. It is incredibly urgent to meet those needs.
But it immediately becomes vulnerable to the indifference objection.
Yes. If everyone is just barely surviving, it seems intuitively wrong for justice to be indifferent to massive wealth accumulating just above that survival line.
It implies we don't care if just across the street from the survival line, one group is hoarding all the wealth and political influence. That feels unjust, even if basic needs are met.
Exactly. So now flip it. If you set the single threshold, let's say you define it as reasonable contentment or full flourishing.
Then you avoid the indifference objection because you're pushing the line of required intervention much higher.
You do. But this makes the positive thesis implausible. Is society truly unjust if everyone has great life opportunities, but someone is slightly below perfect contentment?
And the urgency just breaks down. The difference between someone living in abject, harsh poverty and someone who is merely slightly discontented, well, even if both are below that high threshold, the moral difference is enormous.
And a single threshold just fails to capture this difference in moral weight.
So the high-low dilemma proves that sufficiency cannot be represented by a single, flat moral floor.
It forces the definitive move to multiple threshold Sufficientarianism. We need different standards for different kinds of needs, and we need to prioritize some standards over others. This complexity is precisely what the umbel view is designed to structure and resolve.
So if we need multiple thresholds, how does the umbel view organize them? How does it avoid just becoming a messy laundry list of duties? This is where that umbel metaphor finally comes into its own.
The umbel view is a structural theory. It combines the idea of vertical priority, meaning some thresholds matter more than others, a multiple-level view with horizontal diversity.
Which is the idea that justice covers many different kinds of value.
Right, a spheric view.
So tell us more about the metaphor. Why an umbel inflorescence?
An umbel is a flower cluster where the individual stalks or pedicels all arise from a single common point at the top of the main stem.
Okay.
That singular foundational stem is the dimension of basic needs. It gets absolute vertical priority. From that base, the separate distinct spheres, the pedicels, spread out horizontally.
And crucially, the core principle of the umbel view is that deficiency in one sphere cannot be compensated by a surplus in another, this idea of incommensurability.
Exactly.
So if my stock representing health is too short, Having an extremely long stock representing education does not rectify the overall injustice.
It's a non-compensatory model. Justice requires that no one is left with insufficient capability or opportunity in any sphere of justice-relevant value. You have to meet the minimum standard across the board, not just on average.
That makes the umbel view incredibly demanding.
It really does.
To define this complex, multidimensional space, the umbel view adopts the capability approach, which was popularized by the Nobel laureate Amartya Sen and the philosopher Martha Nussbaum as its fundamental currency of justice.
And this is a critical philosophical shift. We are not distributing abstract resources like money or subjective happiness units. Justice is concerned with the distribution of effective freedom to valuable human functionings.
So it's about what a person can actually do or be.
That's it. The threshold is interpreted as a secure freedom space.
And we're securing two kinds of freedom here. Well-being freedom, the value you get from the functioning itself, like being well-fed, and agency freedom,
Which is the distinct value of being able to choose whether or not to achieve that functioning.
the classic example being the difference between the starving person and the fasting person.
Right. Both lack food. But only the fasting person possesses the capability, the effective freedom, to choose whether or not to be well-nourished. The starving person is deficient because their capability is violated. They are denied the ability to be the author of their own life in that respect.
So the umbel view focuses on ensuring that structural and systemic disadvantages don't prevent the capacity to choose a worthwhile life.
It shifts the focus from inputs like money or outputs like happiness to the foundational ability to choose a valued life.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics. The umbel view argues that certain areas of life are objectively important for human flourishing in any society. These areas make up the 8 non-reducible spheres that define the boundaries of the umbel structure.
And we must achieve sufficiency in all of them.
Let's go through this complex list, because this is where the sheer scope of the umbel view becomes really apparent.
Okay, first, you have basic needs. This is the foundational STEM: food, water, shelter, clothing, decent community, association, social interaction. These are universal and non-negotiable. If these are unmet, no other sphere matters.
That makes sense. What's next?
Second is health, the capability for good enough health. This extends beyond just surviving. It means access to preventative care, adequate hygiene, and the structural support needed to avoid chronic, preventable illness.
Then number 3.
Education, opportunities for decent primary education, access to knowledge, and the critical thinking skills sufficient to navigate modern society and participate meaningfully in political life.
And 4th.
Meaningful work, the capability for work that is not forced and which provides meaning, satisfaction, and allows for the development of personal talents and self-respect.
Okay, 5th.
Community. This is the social dimension, avoiding social exclusion, having adequate social bonds, and possessing the freedom to live without arbitrary interference from others.
And 6th.
Reasonable autonomy. This is the overarching freedom to author one's own life, including the necessary emotional and psychological stability. But unlike the others, this sphere often sort of supervenes upon the successful fulfillment of the preceding 7.
That's 6. What about the final 2? These are often the trickiest in political philosophy.
They are. The final 2 are the highly challenging positional goods.
Okay.
Number 7 is political equality. This means much more than just having the right to vote. It means adequate political influence, equal access to the mechanisms of power, and an equal opportunity to have your voice heard and counted.
And the last one.
Number 8 is social status. This covers public recognition, respect, and the avoidance of systematic discrimination or humiliation based on arbitrary factors.
This list immediately shows how high the bar for justice is set. And the fact that we can't trade a surplus of health for a deficiency in social status is key.
Absolutely.
But let's focus on those positional goods. Political equality and social status. Why do they require almost equal distribution to reach sufficiency?
Because the value of a positional good is intrinsically relative to what others possess. My political influence is only adequate if I have mechanisms to counter your massive political wealth or your connections.
So if you have unlimited funds to lobby, and I have only my single vote, my actual political influence is deficient, even if my formal rights are secure on paper.
Precisely. In effect, if the very rich have vastly disproportionate wealth, that wealth corrupts the positional goods. It structurally guarantees a deficiency in political equality for everyone else.
I see.
Therefore, achieving sufficiency in these 2 positional spheres requires a distribution that is very nearly, if not perfectly, equal. The umbel view demands radical equality in these specific spheres, not because equality is valued intrinsically, but because it is the only way to eliminate the deficiency of status or influence for the non-rich.
It's one thing for philosophers to design this structure, but it's a completely different challenge to draw the exact line for enough across these 8 complex spheres.
It's a huge challenge.
Where exactly is the threshold located for meaningful work or good enough health?
The sources are very realistic about this. Philosophers cannot set the precise threshold location from an armchair. That requires rigorous empirical contextual analysis and extensive democratic deliberation.
So what good is the theory then?
Well, the umbel view offers hopeful guidance. It's rooted in the epistemological application of the deficiency asymmetry. The advice is focus on manifest deficiencies.
Okay, so let's apply that moral asymmetry to knowledge. Sufficiency is abstract and complex. It's an open-ended freedom space leading to flourishing. It's hard to define the ideal life.
Yes, but deficiency is concrete, tangible, and conspicuous. A life marked by deficiency is immediately obvious. It's painted by that specific, painful lack.
Yeah.
Poverty, severe illness, social exclusion, or lack of literacy.
Right.
We might not know exactly what adequate education looks like in every society, but we can instantly identify a lack of basic reading skills as a manifest deficiency.
So instead of trying to define the perfect, sufficient life from scratch, policy should be structured to relentlessly study and eliminate the things we know empirically cause manifest deficiency.
That's the strategy. It's called political deficiencism. It focuses our political efforts on the observable, non-negotiable harms of lack, rather than chasing some abstract ideal of perfect sufficiency.
Political deficiencism sounds like a highly practical approach. It implies a relentless focus on minimizing deficiencies across that complex, multidimensional umbel space.
That's right. Political institutions should be organized primarily to identify, track, and minimize deficiencies in those 8 justice-relevant values.
And since the umbel view insists on the vertical priority of basic needs sphere 1, that remains the absolute first goal.
Always. But once that foundation is laid, the political work shifts to minimizing deficiencies across the complex web of spheres. And this is tough because deficiencies rarely occur in isolation.
No, they tend to pile up on the same people.
That's where the concept of deficiency clusters becomes absolutely central for policy. Deficiencies in health, education, meaningful work, and community often stack up in the same populations.
And this is due to robust negative spillover effects.
Exactly. Systemic forces that link different forms of disadvantage. For instance, low income causes stress, which causes health problems, which limits education access, which reduces employability, creating a terrible feedback loop.
Which means we can't treat each sphere in isolation. We need what the source calls cluster-breaking policies.
Precisely. This means systematically enhancing what are called fertile functionings, like educational capabilities or access to reliable public transport, that have positive spillover effects into multiple spheres.
And at the same time,
Simultaneously, we have to protect people against corrosive disadvantages, like persistent poverty, inadequate housing, or social exclusion, which actively drive the formation of these generational deficiency clusters. For the umbel view to be achieved, you have to break the clusters.
Okay, so let's talk policy. Universal Basic Income, or UBI, has gained a lot of traction as a proposal across the political spectrum, and it seems like a natural fit for sufficiency theories. How does the umbel view justify it?
The umbel view sees economic deprivation, the simple lack of money, as the central corrosive disadvantage in modern economies.
So it's the root of many other problems.
It is. The absence of a stable income stream actively contributes to deficiency clusters by limiting access to better housing, nutrition, preventative health care, and educational stability. A UBI, by providing a substantial, unconditional cash grant, directly counters this corrosive disadvantage.
It provides the stable economic foundation that secures those basic capabilities, allowing people to take control of their own lives and reducing the vulnerability inherent in precarious work.
And crucially, the sources argue that the Sufficientarian case for UBI is theoretically cleaner than the egalitarian case.
How so?
The egalitarian justification often gets bogged down in measuring whether the UBI reduces relative inequality enough. The Sufficientarian justification is much simpler. We are obligated to do it because poverty corrodes capabilities. It stops people from leading a good enough life across multiple spheres.
So the justification focuses squarely on the primacy of deficiency and the structural injustice that results from poverty.
That's it. However, the umbel view is not dogmatic about UBI. It notes that UBI is a plausible implication, but not a necessity.
What does that mean?
In societies with weak social welfare systems like the US, it might be highly effective. But in North European welfare states that already have comprehensive state-funded systems guaranteeing health, education, and social security, a comprehensive UBI might be less necessary.
Because the deficiencies are already being addressed through public services.
Right. Remember, justice requires sufficiency in all 8 spheres, not just a successful UBI program.
Okay, let's move to another sphere. Health is a key one, sphere 2. When we apply the umbel view, we arrive at a specific form of health sufficientarianism.
Which says that a health distribution is unjust if and only if someone falls below the threshold of good enough health.
This immediately confronts our common intuition that health inequality itself is the injustice. But the umbel view clarifies why health inequality is a moral problem. We know health follows a stark social gradient.
Let's look at the classic example. Lucky versus Misera. Lucky comes from a high socioeconomic background, well-educated, lives in an affluent neighborhood with clean air and good resources.
And Misera.
Misera comes from a low-income, working-class background in a polluted, resource-poor area. And due to these structural factors, the health gap, the difference in expected lifespan, can be 18 to 20 years.
An egalitarian would point to this difference and call the inequality itself the injustice.
Right. But the umbel view, because it's rooted in deficiency, offers a deeper structural explanation.
Which is what?
The injustice, in the umbel view, is rooted in the fact that the structural factors, the low income, the poor housing, the polluted environment Misera's population, is unequally capable of preventing and coping with health deficiencies.
These are the causes of the causes.
That's the phrase. Misera's capabilities to avoid or cope with disease are below the good enough health threshold. The injustice is that Misera is structurally forced into deficiency, not merely that Lucky has more years of life.
This stance has radical implications for healthcare allocation, particularly in situations involving scarce, life-saving resources.
Like the life-saving treatment case.
Tell us about that.
Imagine 20-year-old Lucky and 20-year-old Misera both equally need a scarce life-saving treatment right now. We have 3 moral options for who gets it.
Okay, what are they?
A. Give the treatment to Lucky, which maximizes what are called QALY's quality-adjusted life years, or the expected total life years. B. Give the treatment to Misera because you're prioritizing the person who is already worse off in life prospects. Or C. Treat them equally. Flip a coin, or first come, first served.
Okay, option A, maximizing utility by favoring Lucky because she'll live longer after the treatment. That feels deeply unfair, especially since her longer prospects are rooted in unjust social advantages to begin with.
It does. Option B is the prioritarian choice, favoring Misera because she is the worst off in overall life prospects. But this means we're discriminating against Lucky, who is equally deficient in this specific acute need.
Which leaves C.
And the umbel view strongly supports option C.
Why does sufficiency mandate flipping a coin?
Health sufficientarianism insists on non-discrimination between equally needy patients. Since both Lucky and Misera are equally deficient in the present, they both equally need the treatment to survive, their background socioeconomic status is irrelevant for this immediate allocation decision.
They're equal in terms of present need.
And entitlement to life-saving assistance. The umbel view demands that the structural injustice causing Misera's shorter life prospects be addressed by cluster-breaking policies, not by discriminating in the moment of acute care.
Finally, let's address wealth at the very top. Limitarianism is the view that wealth is morally impermissible beyond what is necessary for a fully flourishing life, basically setting a riches line or a ceiling on wealth.
And limitarianism rests on what's called the surplus money assumption. The idea that there is a point above which additional material resources add nothing of moral value to a person's life.
So if we accept this, extreme wealth is problematic only because it exists in an already unjust world where other people are deficient.
Right. The traditional arguments against extreme wealth are the unmet urgent needs argument, that money could be used to save lives, and the democratic equality argument.
Which we touched on before, that extreme wealth translates into undue political influence, which guarantees a deficiency in political equality for everyone else.
And the umbel view internalizes both of these arguments, but it rejects the traditional floor-ceiling hybrid model because that floor, usually just basic needs, is far too low. The umbel view insists the floor must be high sufficiency across all 8 spheres.
So how does the umbel view ground the moral impermissibility of extreme wealth?
Through a powerful normative argument rooted in deficiency minimization. The major premise is this. It is distinctively impermissible to forego an opportunity to minimize unjust deficiency, when doing so will not contribute to your own flourishing.
That's accepting the surplus money assumption.
Correct. The minor premise is that extreme wealth is, by definition, surplus money, and represents a lost opportunity to reduce existing deficiencies in others across the 8 demanding spheres of the umbel.
So the conclusion?
The conclusion is that it is distinctively impermissible to have extreme wealth.
This means the mere existence of extreme wealth, while deficiencies still exist across those 8 spheres, is a failure of justice.
Yes.
But what if someone is rich, but still lacking something? This raises the interesting paradox of the exclusion of the rich case.
This is a great test case. Imagine an extremely wealthy person, far above the riches line, who is part of a marginalized minority group. They are systematically excluded, looked down upon, and denied recognition by the majority culture.
So they are below the threshold for social status, which is sphere 8.
Right. They are simultaneously above the limitarian ceiling and below a sufficientarian floor.
So what does the umbel view say about this?
It says 2 things. First, the systematic exclusion is a profound injustice that society must rectify to eliminate that deficiency of status. That's a primary duty.
But what about their money?
It still justifies the redistribution of their surplus money. Since the surplus money assumption holds, the excess wealth provides no moral benefit to the owner, that wealth is a lost opportunity to reduce other people's deficiencies. The injustice of their status deficiency does not negate the requirement to minimize deficiency in others with their surplus wealth.
And that structural guarantee is the ultimate takeaway here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because political equality and social status are positional goods, their sufficiency threshold requires near equal distribution anyway.
Exactly. Extreme wealth, by its very nature, creates structural deficiencies in those 2 critical spheres for the non-rich, making it profoundly incompatible with the umbel view of justice.
So this deep dive has really shown that the umbel view moves sufficientarianism far beyond a simple moral floor.
It transforms it into a highly demanding, comprehensive political ideal.
The core takeaway for you is the umbel structure itself. Justice is dedicated to eliminating deficiencies across 8 separate, incommensurable spheres.
Right.
The basic needs act as the universal high-priority stem, and from there branch out crucial requirements for health, education, meaningful work, community, autonomy, and those radical, equality-demanding positional values of political equality and social status.
And by using capabilities as its currency and adopting multiple thresholds, the umbel view offers robust, plausible answers to the criticisms that plagued earlier sufficiency theories. It successfully positions it as a powerful theoretical alternative to traditional egalitarianism.
And its practical demand is enormous. It mandates a policy approach, political deficiencism, that focuses relentlessly on tackling deficiency clusters.
It really does.
It forces us to look at the systemic feedback loops. Poor health, reinforcing low education, reinforcing low status, and prioritize cluster-breaking policies to ensure that social justice is fulfilled in all 8 spheres, allowing every individual the capability to author a good enough life.
And here is a final provocative thought for you to explore on your own. The umbel view insists on the incommensurability of deficiencies.
Meaning, we cannot numerically compare a deficiency in health to a deficiency in political equality.
Exactly. And this raises a fundamental challenge. When resources are scarce, how do we decide which type of injustice to minimize first? The umbel view forces us to confront the fact that a lack of decent housing and a complete lack of political influence are 2 fundamentally different moral emergencies. How should a democratic society develop a framework to weigh one profound, unique injustice against another?
The umbel view sets the ideal bar, and in doing so, it reveals just how far modern societies still have to go to fulfill the true obligations of distributive justice. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.